If one of us would be freaking out, three other people would go, "Excuse me?"
He was the steady beat behind the world's most explosive band, a calm in the chaos of rock's biggest revolution. Ringo Starr is finally peeling back the curtain, and what he's saying isn't the fairy tale fans grew up with. Behind the smiles, the suits, and the screaming crowds, the Beatles were something else entirely. Tension simmered, egos clashed, and not everyone pulled their weight. In a rare and unscripted moment, Ringo drops a quiet bombshell about what really kept them going and what nearly tore them apart. And no, it's not what you think. Why did the nice Beatle finally speak out now? And who among them was the real force holding it all together until it wasn't? The truth has been hiding in plain sight for decades, until now, the unbreakable beat. At 84, Ringo Starr stands as one of rock and roll's most enduring figures, an icon whose rhythm helped define a generation. From humble beginnings in the working-class streets of Liverpool, where he first played drums in basement jam sessions, to the heights of Beatlemania, Ringo's musical journey spans more than 6 decades. As the drummer for the Beatles, he laid down the backbone of the most influential band in history. Yet his career didn't end with the group's breakup. Instead, it evolved, leading to a successful solo career and the creation of his long-running AllStar Band. What's remarkable is not just Ringo's longevity, but his energy. At an age when most legends retire from the spotlight, he continues to tour the world with the same laid-back charm and playful spirit that made him a fan favorite in the 1960s. His performances today aren't nostalgia acts, they're full-fledged celebrations of music, featuring an ever-evolving lineup of accomplished musicians. Ringo still thrives on collaboration, and his joy in making music with others remains infectious. At the heart of Ringo's enduring popularity is his down-to-earth nature. Despite all his fame, he has never borne the burden of ego. Interviewing him, he will insist on how valuable it was to share 3 other Beatles who would keep one another in line, remembering how they would tease or call one another out if anybody began to behave like a star. This earthiness wasn't a tactic, it's his nature. Even now, he speaks about thankfulness, about being fortunate to continue playing, and about music as something to be shared, not owned. At the center of it all is Ringo's philosophy. Have fun playing the music, keep playing, and be good to people. He never marketed himself as being the technically most sophisticated drummer, but he had something that couldn't be taught: soul, feel, and timing. His humility is not false modesty. It's a genuine sense that to be in a band, to be part of something greater than yourself, is what makes music strong. That spark, steadfast, joyful, unbreakable, is what transforms Ringo Starr into something greater than a rock icon. He's a living beat that won't let go. But behind that easygoing rhythm was a band dynamic far more turbulent than fans ever imagined. The Beatles' internal clashes. While the Beatles are often romanticized as a flawless unit of musical genius, Ringo Starr offers a more grounded perspective. He openly admits that the Fab Four didn't always get along. Far from it. "We had rows," he says plainly, referring to the frequent arguments and personality clashes that brewed behind the scenes. As 4 strong individuals with different creative visions, egos, and life paths, tension was inevitable. The pressure of fame, relentless recording schedules, and growing personal lives only added fuel to the fire. In spite of these internal disputes, something magical occurred each time they entered the studio. Ringo points out that no matter how terrible the fight was, once the counting began, all 4 of them delivered their best. Music always took priority. Their capacity to put differences aside for the sake of the song is one of the things that made the Beatles so exceptional. This implicit professionalism, this dedication to the work, kept them intact longer than most groups might have remained under comparable stress. Despite all this, the emotional toll of incessant friction got its way. Ringo looks back on how, as the band grew older, the Beatles were less central to their lives. Children, weddings, and individual aspirations slowly moved them apart. What had been a thrilling, all-absorbing brotherhood unraveled. Even though their work remained far superior, the intimacy that characterized their younger days became increasingly difficult to sustain. What Ringo uncovers is the nuance of artistic relationships at their finest. The Beatles were not a band. They were an artistic crucible, in which large personalities bumped against each other and genius resulted. Tension, under these circumstances, was not a failure. It was a means to an end. While the public heard harmony, Ringo recalls the human element, the difficulty of remaining present while creating something greater than they were. It's a reminder that beneath the myth of the Beatles was a genuine, unpolished group of people figuring out how to navigate both fame and friendship. Paul the Engine. Among the many dynamics that defined the Beatles, Ringo Starr is clear about one force that drove the band forward: Paul McCartney's tireless work ethic. While each member brought unique brilliance to the table, it was Paul who consistently acted as the engine behind the group's productivity. Ringo, in recent reflections, doesn't hesitate to credit Paul for keeping the band moving during times when the enthusiasm of others was beginning to fade. Paul was the one making the calls, saying, "All right, lads, let's go," when the others might have preferred to take a step back. In Ringo's words, without Paul's persistent energy and discipline, the band wouldn't have made as many records or pushed themselves as hard as they did. As the stress of fame grew and personal lives expanded, not all the Beatles were as interested in the nitty-gritty of being part of the most well-known band in the world. Ringo and John, especially, were more likely to take the few precious moments of rest, particularly after years of virtually non-stop touring, media commitments, and recording sessions. Paul, on the other hand, was never thinking about anything except the next project, the next tune, the next masterpiece. He wasn't just productive, he was consumed by the creative process and the new possibilities that the group had yet to discover. That forward energy frequently clashed with the more laid-back attitudes of his fellow band members, but it also prevented the Beatles from stalling. Even in the Beatles' later periods, when internal conflict and artistic disagreements were highest, Paul continued to be the unbending fulcrum of action. In most respects, his leadership took up a space vacated by the general pulling back of John, whose energies had started turning towards other artistic and personal interests. George was also becoming increasingly self-expressive and spiritually explorative. In this changing world, Paul's vision kept the group on track to a collective goal, even as the cohesion under the surface was beginning to break down. He was the one arranging studio time, starting new sessions, and demanding order in an otherwise unraveling situation. While at times it earned him resentment, it also kept the group moving well beyond the time that most would have disintegrated. Ringo's recognition of Paul's work isn't just about seeing hard labor, it's a deeper respect for what it was like to keep together a band comprised of strong, frequently clashing creative energies. Paul wasn't simply writing hits or playing guitar. He was behaving as the unofficial manager, director, and goad all rolled into one. Without that incentive, many of the Beatles' late-period masterpieces may never have been realized. Though their talent and chemistry were undeniable, it took Paul's will to make those things translate into music that would endure. Ultimately, Ringo's memoirs make one thing certain. The history of the Beatles is as much about will as it is about genius. And no one was more the embodiment of will than Paul McCartney. Ringo's unconventional path to mastery. Ringo Starr's journey to becoming one of the most iconic drummers in music history didn't follow the conventional path of disciplined practice or formal training. In fact, he's the first to admit he hated practicing alone. Sitting in a room with a drum kit, running through rudiments or exercises, simply bored him. The solitude of repetition never appealed to him, and he found no joy in mechanical drills. Instead, what fueled his growth was interaction, playing with others, feeling the rhythm of real songs, and experiencing the energy of live music. This hands-on social method of learning wasn't just a preference, it was the foundation of his style and musical intuition. Ringo grew up in Liverpool surrounded by other young musicians who were as raw and hungry as he was. He did not enter into a formal world of music conservatories or private lessons. He received his schooling in the working-class basements and local clubs of his native city. He started with minimal equipment, just a snare drum and brushes, and sat in on lunchtime gigs at the factory where he worked. It was in those weekend gigs and casual jam sessions with local friends that Ringo started to feel his rhythm. According to him, most of the musicians were not very talented, but that was irrelevant. They were all learning together, screwing up real time, and getting better through constant jamming. This grassroots communal process influenced not only Ringo's talent, but also his overall philosophy of music. Playing music for him wasn't about being perfect, it was about connection. Band members' give and take and mutual energy of a live crowd, and the real-time flow of improvisation were 1,000 times more important to him than a metronome or lesson book. Flash and technical skills were unimportant to him. Rather, he created a natural sense of timing and groove that worked for the song more than for himself. His drumming was more feel than finesse, and that ultimately distinguished him. What's impressive is the way this unconventional path brought Ringo to be the pulse of the world's best-known band. His critics and fellow musicians frequently credit him with his skill at serving the song with subtlety and restraint, a style that may have been sacrificed had he been schooled in a more formal or ego-driven setting. His drumming was always thoroughly integrated into the band's dynamic, and that's a direct result of his early days. Instead of crafting his music alone, Ringo let it be shaped by individuals, locales, and spontaneous events. That collaborative energy not only characterized his method, but also contributed to establishing the sound of an era. Leap of faith. In the early 1960s, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes were one of the most popular bands in Liverpool, and Ringo Starr was their charismatic drummer. They had a strong local following, steady work, and even international gigs in Germany, a sign of success in a growing music scene. For a working-class musician like Ringo, being in a stable, in-demand group like the Hurricanes was a big deal. They were a lively, showy act, and Ringo had carved out a respected place within it. So when the opportunity came to join a lesser-known band called the Beatles, it wasn't an obvious move. It was a leap of faith that went against logic, comfort, and even loyalty. It was not fame and fortune, little of which they had then, that drew Ringo to the Beatles, but something less tangible: chemistry. He had worked alongside John, Paul, and George in Hamburg, where their respective bands played endless hours of big band sets in various clubs. Ringo would hang around late just to see them play, drawn by the chemistry of the three. He was drawn by how well they fit together, how much enjoyment they were obviously having, and how they responded like a real unit. They had a magnetic quality about them, a visceral musical energy that he automatically wanted to tap into. It was not about flash or showmanship, it was about feel, connection, and the sense that they were going somewhere important. When the offer finally arrived on short notice through Beatles manager Brian Epstein, Ringo jumped at it. Even though the Hurricanes had a bigger following and more established status, he picked the Beatles without hesitation. He would later tell how those around him asked, "Why give up a decent act when the Beatles were just starting out?" But Ringo followed his instincts. He did not envision the future clearly, but he sensed the draw of something real. It was not a career decision, it was a gut sense that this team was unique, that their creative abilities were more than anything he had ever felt before. That choice would come to dictate the remainder of his life. Becoming a member of the Beatles propelled Ringo to international fame, but it also made him part of a one-in-a-lifetime collaboration that would transform popular music for all time. His embrace of uncertainty in favor of something more creatively satisfying is a testament to the unassuming bravery behind his affable demeanor. In retrospect, the decision seems so clear, but at the time, it was a bold gamble on gut and a passion for music. Ringo's tale serves as a reminder that some of life's greatest rewards aren't about playing it safe, but about identifying something unique and being bold enough to pursue it. That bold move would change Ringo's life forever, but it also revealed something deeper about the power of not going it alone. The Beatles versus Elvis's isolation. Ringo Starr has often spoken with emotion and clarity about the moment the Beatles met Elvis Presley, a musical hero to all four of them. What struck Ringo most during that meeting wasn't just the excitement of being in the presence of the king of rock and roll, it was the surprising sense of loneliness that surrounded him. Despite the entourage and the wealth, Elvis seemed somehow isolated, detached from those around him. To Ringo, it was a moment of quiet revelation. Here was one of the biggest stars in the world, yet he appeared to have no true equals in his circle, no one to keep him anchored. It was a stark contrast to Ringo's own experience in the Beatles, where brotherhood, even with all its imperfections, provided a constant emotional tether. That difference between Elvis's isolation and the Beatles' camaraderie stuck with Ringo all his life. The Beatles were not merely bandmates, they were four working-class lads from the same city who knew each other's origins, stresses, and vulnerabilities. They had their fights and wars, but they shared a similar sense of direction and identity as well. Whenever one of them began to get too full of himself or behave inappropriately, the others would immediately call him out on it. "Excuse me?" As Ringo remembers affectionately, having the ability to keep each other in line wasn't only useful, it was crucial. It kept them from straying too deep into themselves and grounded their success in something tangible and common. This shared accountability was one of the hidden strengths of the Beatles. Celebrity can warp relationships, inflate egos, and isolate even the most socially adept. But in the Beatles, there was this internal environment that shielded against that. Each member had a different role, a different temperament, but no one was above the others. Even when tensions were high, the bond of shared history and mutual dependence brought them back to center. Ringo often emphasizes that this grounding was essential to their longevity as a group and to their ability to continually innovate without losing touch with who they were. In contrast to Elvis, who shouldered an empire alone, the Beatles shared their fame. In retrospect, Ringo regards that collective journey as one of the most valuable aspects of his career. The Beatles' friendship was imperfect. It changed, wore thin, and sometimes snapped under pressure, but it was never manufactured. It kept them grounded in a universe that constantly tried to mythologize them. To Ringo, being alone versus being in a band is more than having companionship on stage. It's about survival on an emotional level in a world that isolates its idols. Elvis might have had the crown, but the Beatles had something more important to each other, and to Ringo, that was all that mattered. The AI debate. In 2025, the Beatles surprised the world one final time with the release of Now and Then, a hauntingly beautiful track built from an old John Lennon demo recorded in the 1970s. For fans, it was nothing short of a musical resurrection. Lennon's voice, long silenced by tragedy, now rising again in harmony with Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. But behind the song's emotional resonance was years of technological evolution and careful curation. Ringo Starr played an essential role in completing the track, contributing new drum parts and lending his unmistakable rhythmic signature to what would become a Grammy-winning performance. For him, it wasn't just another session, it was a personal, reflective moment, reconnecting with bandmates both living and gone. What was so incredible and so contentious about Now and Then was the application of artificial intelligence to pull and recover John Lennon's vocal track from a deteriorated cassette recording. In previous decades, the task would have been impossible, but the improvements in machine learning enabled engineers to separate Lennon's voice from the surrounding noise and distortion with breathtaking precision. AI did not generate John's voice. It uncovered it from under layers of distortion and noise. But even this type of computer help fueled broad argumentation. To some, it was a victory of art intersecting with technology. To others, it kindled uncomfortable questions about where we set the line between the real and the phony in music. Ringo, always insisting on the emotional authenticity of performance, recognized the ordeal of it all. He saw the project as a sincere and respectful tribute, not a gimmick or an exploitation. It was still us, he could say, and in a lot of ways, it was. He and Paul overdubbed new parts in real time, and George Harrison's guitar, tracked in the 90s, filled out the soundscape. Nevertheless, Ringo knows the bigger dialogue the song has created. If a vocal by Lennon can be brought back, what's to prevent it from creating one? When does the machine become the maker? These aren't abstract questions. These get at legacy, ownership, and the essence of music. As Now and Then solidifies as the Beatles' real last chapter, it's also a metaphor for the new world the industry is ushering in, where memory, feeling, and code can now combine. Ringo's involvement makes the song grounded in something profoundly human. His drumming, his presence, and his relation to the other three Beatles are what take this from an AI exercise to a cohesive artistic moment. Ultimately, he facilitated closing the circle, not only for the band, but for generations of fans in millions. However, the questions it poses, concerning creativity, consent, and the role of technology in art, are likely to resound long after the last notes disappear. Reinvention through collaboration. After the breakup of the Beatles, Ringo Starr found himself at a personal and professional crossroads. Though he had achieved global fame as part of the most successful band in history, stepping into the spotlight alone brought its own set of challenges. For years, he had been the steady presence behind the drum kit, a vital member, yes, but often overshadowed by the Lennon-McCartney songwriting powerhouse and the larger-than-life personalities of his bandmates. When he decided in 1989 to form the AllStar Band, it was not out of ambition to dominate the stage, but as a response to an unexpected opportunity and a desire to continue doing what he loved most, playing in a band. Still, Ringo admits that he felt deeply insecure about putting together and leading a group for the first time. Unlike his earlier experiences, where he joined pre-existing bands, this time the responsibility was entirely his. What was so innovative about the All-Star Band idea was that Ringo insisted on leveling the playing field and working together. The roster was a revolving group of veteran, frequently legendary musicians, guitarists like Joe Walsh, Billy Preston, Dr. John, and Levon Helm, each with their own discography of smash hits. Ringo didn't wish to be the only star. Instead, he had envisioned a performance in which everybody had their turn, in which there was respect both ways, and fans were celebrating the ensemble as opposed to an individual star. The strategy reflected Ringo's long-held conviction in musical camaraderie and ease in being part of a larger entity. Although his name was at the top of the bill, the performances were organized more as jam sessions between friends than as a conventional solo show. With time, fronting the All-Star Band dispelled the lingering self-doubt that had dogged him since the last days of the Beatles. No longer was he merely a drummer in the background. He was the heartbeat and host of a live, breathing party celebrating rock history. He came to find joy in being center stage in a manner that was still true to himself, never stealing the spotlight, but leading with warmth and humor. The band wasn't about ego. It was about connection, joy, and musicians making music because they love it and want to be together doing it. For Ringo, it was a personal metamorphosis, a transition from sideman to self-assured bandleader, yet not at the expense of his strong principles of humility and teamwork. Years later, the All-Star Band is still on the road and going strong, one of Ringo's crowning glories. It's not only a hit post-Beatles enterprise, it's a blueprint for how musical leadership can be cooperative instead of dictatorial. Ringo created a venue where stars could shine together, where music itself was the central focus. By this band, he not only redefined his public image, but also reaffirmed the essential truth he's always been about: that music, when it's good, is a communal experience. The All-Star Band is a testament to his development, not only as an artist, but as a human being who discovered strength in numbers even at the pinnacle of success. Film or fiction? The announcement of director Sam Mendes' ambitious four-part Beatles biopic series, with each film centered on a different band member, generated excitement across the entertainment world. But it also stirred a wave of controversy, particularly surrounding the casting choices. While the project promises to tell the story of the Beatles from four unique perspectives, many fans and critics quickly took issue with the actors selected to portray the iconic members of the band. Most notably, the choice of Irish actor Barry Keoghan to play Ringo Starr raised eyebrows. Keoghan, an acclaimed performer known for emotionally complex roles, faced immediate scrutiny, not for his talent, but for his physical dissimilarity to Ringo and his non-Liverpool roots. Public response was immediate and sharply polarized. On the positive side, movie buffs and Mendes supporters applauded the casting on artistic grounds, citing Keogh's range and intensity as an actor. On the negative side, Beatles fundamentalists and Liverpool fans were frustrated in expressing outrage that casting an outsider, particularly one who has an accent and manner that do not match Ringo's, could undermine the realism of the performance. Ringo, whose own backstory is set in gritty, working-class Liverpool streets, speaks to a very regional identity that fans believe needs to be respected on screen. This backlash reflects a broader feeling that depicting Ringo accurately takes more than shallow mimicry. It takes an actual grasp of where he came from, geographically and culturally. Aside from personal casting criticisms, the Mendes biopics ask larger questions regarding how filmmakers walk the line between truth and narrative when dramatizing the lives of actual people. Although biopics typically employ creative license, audiences increasingly demand sensitivity, and respect when portraying adored public figures. Ringo, alive and active to this day, will inevitably have his image molded by someone who never lived his life or got to experience his world. That conflict between the dictates of narrative drama and the need for cultural veracity lies at the center of the current debate. It is testimony to an increasing expectation that directors treat the legacies they are borrowing from with respect, especially when the subjects are both famous and deeply resonant for millions of fans. Ultimately, the movies will succeed or fail not only on their cinematic value, but on how authentically they embody the essence of the men behind the legend. For Ringo's own part, he has never publicly denounced the casting, sticking to his characteristic aplomb and sense of humor. But for fans who are protective of his legacy, the problem is more than screen time. It's about representation, identity, and respecting the actual human being behind the drums. As hype mounts toward the 2028 release, the question stands, will these movies shed light on the Beatles' inner lives with a new vision, or mangle them beneath the pressures of Hollywood convention? Either way, Ringo's narrative, like his rhythm, should be treated with tenderness. But just as Hollywood crafts its version of the past, fate has a way of unearthing the real thing, often where no one's looking. Rediscovered sounds. In 2025, the rediscovery of the Beatles' original 1962 Decca audition tape made headlines around the world, sparking renewed interest in the band's earliest days. Long considered a footnote in Beatles lore, a rejection that famously led Decca Records to pass on what would become the biggest band in history. The tape suddenly resurfaced in a Vancouver record shop, offering fans a clearer, fuller version of those formative performances. Alongside this, remixed archival tracks like Flying, an instrumental from the Magical Mystery Tour sessions, revealed previously unheard vocal fragments and production nuances. Together, these finds didn't just satisfy fan curiosity, they added new chapters to the Beatles' story, challenging what we thought we knew about their artistic evolution. For Ringo Starr, listening to these newly unearthed recordings is not just a nostalgic trip, it's an exploration of lost aspects of his own history. He has talked with both humor and awe about how some takes, concepts, or tracks get lost in the fog of such a fruitful career. Hearing songs such as Flying in its remixed form again provokes recollection of studio moments that, in the moment, seemed unimportant. These bits provide a glimpse into the Beatles' collaborative process, the experiments that never saw the light of day, the ideas that emerged mid-session without warning, and the interactions of personalities as they created their innovative sound. For Ringo, it's like finding fragments of an old photograph, old but oddly new. What's most remarkable about these rediscoveries is how they demonstrate the ever-expanding nature of the Beatles' legacy. With advancements in audio restoration, machine learning, and mixing technologies, we are now able to revisit the band's work with unprecedented clarity and detail. Tracks that once sounded muddled or incomplete can be reassembled, reframed, and even reinterpreted. This is not just about cleaning up dirty old tapes. It's about unearthing hidden layers of intention and artistry that were lost before. As Ringo and other participants absorb these discoveries, they are becoming actors in a form of time travel, communing with their own past in ways they never could, when the music was created. But these moments also raise intriguing questions about the permanence of musical history. How much of our understanding of the Beatles is shaped by what we've heard, or not heard until now? What other forgotten or overlooked pieces might still be hiding in archives or private collections? And, as technology continues to evolve, will future generations hear the Beatles in ways even the band themselves never imagined? For Ringo, these rediscoveries reinforce the wonder of what they made, but also identify a reality that only time can show us. That magnificent art is never really completed. It merely keeps revealing itself. If you enjoyed this glimpse behind the Beatles curtain, make sure to like, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more untold stories from music legends. And don't go anywhere. Click the next video on your screen for another deep dive into the moments that shaped rock history.